We're just days away from reaching 1,000 subscribers. If we hit this goal in the next 15 days, we'll be able to keep the channel running and continue bringing you these stories. Your subscription makes all the difference. It's quick and helps us enormously. The Horse Whisperer. Chapter 1. The Challenge. The sun was barely cresting the horizon over the Double Bar Ranch in Montana Territory when the laughter erupted from the bunkhouse, loud enough to wake half the sleeping cowboys and set the barn cats to scattering. At the center of the commotion stood 19-year-old Sarah May Colton, her chin raised defiantly as she faced down a circle of grinning ranch hands who clearly thought they'd just heard the funniest joke in the territory. "You're gonna what now, missy?" wheezed old Pete Hawkins, slapping his knee as tears of mirth ran down his weathered cheeks. "Did you just say you're fixin' to tame Devil's Thunder?" Sarah May's green eyes flashed with determination, though she kept her voice steady and calm. "That's exactly what I said, Mr. Hawkins. I aim to gentle that horse, and I'll do it without breaking his spirit." This declaration set off another round of guffaws from the assembled cowboys, who'd seen more than their share of confident young men get humbled by horses half as ornery as the black stallion currently terrorizing the far corral. Devil's Thunder had been the bane of the Double Bar Ranch for the better part of 2 years, a magnificent but utterly savage creature who'd already sent 3 experienced bronco busters to the doctor and 1 to the grave. "Little lady," said Jake Morrison, the ranch foreman, trying to inject some kindness into his voice, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but that horse ain't like the gentle mares you've been working with. Devil's Thunder is pure poison on 4 legs. He's already crippled 2 good men and killed Bronco Bill Henderson last spring." Sarah May had heard the stories, of course. Everyone within 50 miles of the Double Bar knew about Devil's Thunder, a coal-black stallion with the temperament of a grizzly bear and the cunning of a wolf. He'd been captured the previous year after terrorizing ranches throughout the Judith Basin, stealing mares and attacking any rider foolish enough to venture too close to his territory. The capture had taken 30 men and nearly gotten half of them killed, and since then he'd been locked in the reinforced corral, too dangerous to ride but too valuable to shoot. "I know all about what that horse has done," Sarah May said quietly. "But I also know that horses don't become devils without good reason. There's something in that stallion's past that made him the way he is, and until someone takes the time to understand it, he'll never be anything but a killer." "Understanding?" snorted Tex Williamson, the ranch's top bronco buster, and a man who'd broken more horses than some people had seen in their entire lives. "Girlie, the only thing that horse understands is pain and fear. He's a man-killer, plain and simple. Ain't no amount of sweet talking gonna change that." Sarah May had been working on the Double Bar Ranch for 8 months now, ever since her father's death had left her with nowhere else to go and no family to speak of. Robert Hutchinson, the ranch owner, had taken her in partly out of charity and partly because he'd quickly discovered that she had an unusual gift with horses, the gentle mares, the skittish colts, the old workhorses that other hands had given up on. They all seemed to calm down around Sarah May in ways that defied explanation. "What do you think, boss?" Jake Morrison asked, turning to Hutchinson, who'd emerged from the main house to see what all the commotion was about. Robert Hutchinson was a fair man in his 50s, with graying hair and eyes that missed little. He'd built the Double Bar Ranch from nothing through hard work, smart business decisions, and the ability to judge both horses and people with remarkable accuracy. He studied Sarah May for a long moment, taking in her determined posture and the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from her small frame. "That horse has cost me more money than I care to think about," Hutchinson said finally. "Between the men he's injured, the corrals he's destroyed, and the feed he's eaten while giving us nothing in return, Devil's Thunder represents a considerable investment with no return. If Sarah May thinks she can do something with him." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Well, I reckon it's worth a try." "Boss," Jake Morrison protested, "that horse will kill her sure as shooting. Ain't no woman ever broken a horse like that one." "Maybe that's exactly the problem," Sarah May interjected. "Maybe every man who's tried to break him has just made him more determined to fight back. Maybe what he needs isn't to be broken, but to be understood." Hutchinson nodded slowly. "I'll make you a deal, Sarah May. You've got 1 week to show some progress with that horse. If you can manage even to get close to him without getting yourself killed, I'll give you a month to see what you can accomplish. But," his voice grew stern, "at the first sign that you're in real danger, I'm calling it off. That horse isn't worth your life." "And if she fails?" Tex Williamson asked with a smirk. "When that horse stomps her into the dirt like he did Bronco Bill." "If I fail," Sarah May said before Hutchinson could respond, "then you can shoot Devil's Thunder and be done with it. But I won't fail. That horse has been waiting for someone to understand him, and I intend to be that person." As the crowd dispersed, most of the men shaking their heads at what they saw as a young woman's foolish pride, Sarah May made her way toward the far corral where Devil's Thunder was kept. The enclosure was built like a fortress, with 8-foot rails and reinforced posts, designed more like a prison than a pasture. Inside the corral, the stallion stood like a dark storm cloud given form. He was magnificent, nearly 17 hands high, with a coat so black it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His mane flowed like liquid shadow, and his eyes burned with an intelligence and fury that had intimidated every man who'd tried to approach him. When Devil's Thunder spotted Sarah May approaching the fence, his head came up sharply, ears pinned back against his skull in a display of pure aggression. He pawed the ground with one massive hoof, sending up clouds of dust as he issued a challenge that sounded more like a war cry than a whinny. "Easy, beautiful," Sarah May whispered, not moving any closer but simply standing at the fence, studying the magnificent creature before her. "I know they've all hurt you. I know you've got every reason to hate anyone who walks on 2 legs, but I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to listen." The stallion snorted and tossed his head, but Sarah May noticed something the other hands had missed in their focus on his aggression. In Devil's Thunder's eyes, beneath the rage and defiance, there was something else, a deep, abiding pain that spoke of betrayal and loss so profound it had turned love into hatred. "What happened to you, boy?" Sarah May murmured. "What did they do to make you like this?" As she stood there in the growing light of dawn, watching the most dangerous horse in the territory pace his prison like a caged wolf, Sarah May Colton made a silent promise. She would unlock the mystery of Devil's Thunder's rage, and in doing so, she would prove that understanding was always more powerful than force. What she didn't yet realize was that this black stallion would challenge everything she thought she knew about horses, about herself, and about the thin line between wildness and civilization in the untamed American West. Chapter 2. The First Encounter. For 3 days, Sarah May did nothing but watch. Every morning before dawn, she would position herself by the fence of Devil's Thunder's corral with a cup of coffee and simply observe. The other ranch hands thought she'd lost her mind, and more than one muttered about crazy women and their fool notions, but Sarah May paid them no attention. She was learning things about the stallion that no one else had bothered to notice. Devil's Thunder never slept lying down, always standing with his back to the corner of the corral so nothing could approach him unseen. He ate only at night, refusing food during the day when humans might be watching. Most tellingly, he bore scars, not just the random marks that any wild horse might acquire, but deliberate wounds that spoke of systematic cruelty. The revelation came on the 4th morning when Sarah May arrived to find Devil's Thunder standing motionless in the center of his corral. his head hanging low in what looked like exhaustion or despair. The morning light illuminated his right shoulder, and for the first time, Sarah May could clearly see the brand burned into his hide. It wasn't the simple mark of the Double Bar Ranch or any of the neighboring spreads. Instead, it was a complex design that Sarah May recognized with a chill of understanding. The personal brand of Jeremiah Blackwood, a horse trader who'd operated throughout the territory until his death 2 years ago. Blackwood had been notorious for his methods. He captured wild horses using techniques that were brutal even by frontier standards, and his breaking process was legendary for its cruelty. Many of his horses never recovered from the psychological damage, becoming either completely broken creatures or, in rare cases, turning into man-killers consumed with rage. "No wonder," Sarah May whispered, studying the brand with new understanding. "No wonder you hate us all." That afternoon, she sought out old Pete Hawkins, the ranch's most experienced hand and keeper of frontier gossip, stretching back 30 years. "Pete," she said, finding him mending tack in the shade of the barn, "what do you know about Jeremiah Blackwood's operation?" The old cowboy's weathered face darkened at the mention of the name. "Blackwood. That devil's been dead 2 years now, and good riddance. Why are you asking about him? Devil's Thunder bears his brand. I'm thinking that horse might be one of Blackwood's survivors." Pete set down the bridle he'd been working on and studied Sarah May with new interest. "If that's true, then you're dealing with more than just a mean horse girl. Blackwood had a way of breaking a horse's spirit so thorough that most of them never recovered, the ones that fought back." He shook his head grimly. "They turned into killers, every last one of them." "Tell me about Blackwood's methods." "You sure you want to hear this? It ain't pleasant." Sarah May nodded, and Pete began to describe techniques that made her stomach churn. Blackwood would starve horses into weakness, beat them with iron rods, keep them tied in painful positions for days at a time, and use spurs filed to razor sharpness to inflict maximum pain. His goal wasn't to train horses, but to destroy their will to resist. "Most horses broke completely," Pete concluded, "but a few, the strongest ones with the most spirit, they went the other way. All that pain and rage had nowhere to go but outward. They became killing machines, striking out at anything human because they'd learned that humans meant nothing but suffering." "How did Devil's Thunder escape from Blackwood?" "Story goes that Blackwood tried to break a black stallion that had been the pride of some Blackfoot chief. Horse fought him for weeks, refusing to give in no matter what Blackwood did to him. Finally, the horse pretended to submit, let Blackwood get close, then kicked his head clean off his shoulders. After that, the stallion smashed out of the corral and disappeared into the wilderness. That was about 2.5 years ago." Sarah May felt her heart ache for the magnificent creature in the corral. Devil's Thunder hadn't been born evil. He'd been tortured into it by a man who saw horses as nothing more than things to be dominated and broken. "Pete," she said quietly, "if a horse had been through what you just described, would there be any way to reach him? Any way to undo that kind of damage?" The old cowboy considered this for a long moment. "I honestly don't know, girl. Most folks would say once a horse turns killer, there ain't no going back. But, He paused, studying her face. "You got something special with horses, something I ain't seen in 40 years of working with them. If anyone could reach a horse like that, it might be you. But Sarah May," his voice grew urgent, "if you're wrong about this, if that horse is too far gone to save, he'll kill you without hesitation. You need to be sure you're ready for that possibility." That evening, as the ranch settled into the quiet routine of supper and evening chores, Sarah May returned to Devil's Thunder's corral, carrying something she'd never tried before, her father's guitar. Patrick Colton had been a traveling musician before he'd married Sarah May's mother and settled down to ranching, and he'd taught his daughter that music could sometimes reach places that words couldn't touch. Devil's Thunder watched suspiciously as Sarah May approached the fence and settled herself on an old tree stump about 10 feet from the corral rails. When she began to tune the guitar, the stallion's ears pricked forward slightly, not in aggression this time, but in curiosity. Sarah May began to play, not any particular song, but a slow, melancholy melody that seemed to capture the loneliness of the vast Montana sky and the sorrow of creatures forced to endure more than any living thing should have to bear. She played for nearly an hour, never looking directly at the horse, but aware that he had stopped his restless pacing and was standing still, listening. When she finally set the guitar aside and prepared to leave, Sarah May risked a direct look at Devil's Thunder. For just a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and she saw something that gave her hope. A flicker of recognition that beneath the rage and pain, some part of the horse's original spirit still survived. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we'll start the real work." As she walked back toward the main house, Sarah May didn't notice the small crowd of ranch hands who had gathered in the shadows to listen to her playing. Nor did she see the way they looked at each other when Devil's Thunder, for the first time since his capture, lowered his great head and stood quietly in his corral instead of pacing like a caged wolf. But Jake Morrison noticed, and as he shooed the men back to their evening duties, the foreman found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, the young woman with the green eyes and the guitar might actually know something the rest of them had missed. Chapter 3. The Breakthrough. The morning of the 5th day dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of golden light that made the Montana Territory look like God's own country. Sarah May arrived at Devil's Thunder's corral before sunrise, carrying a bucket of oats mixed with molasses and a coil of rope that had been her father's pride and joy. Soft braided leather worked until it was supple as silk and strong as iron. Devil's Thunder was waiting for her, standing alert and watchful in the center of his prison. Something had changed in his posture overnight. While he was still clearly dangerous, the mindless rage that had characterized his behavior for 2 years had been replaced by a keen intelligence that evaluated Sarah May's every movement. "Morning, beautiful," Sarah May said softly, setting the bucket down outside the corral and hanging the rope on a fence post. "I brought you breakfast, but I'm not going to try to come in there with it." "Not yet." She settled onto her tree stump and pulled out a worn leather journal, opening it to pages filled with her father's careful handwriting. Patrick Colton had been more than just a musician. He'd been a student of horses, recording observations and techniques he'd learned from Comanche and Apache horse handlers during his traveling days. "My pa wrote about horses like you," Sarah May said, reading from the journal. "Horses that had been hurt so bad they forgot how to trust. He said the key wasn't to break them down further, but to give them a reason to remember what they used to be before the pain." Devil's Thunder's ears flicked forward at the sound of her voice, and Sarah May noticed that he'd moved slightly closer to the fence. Not much, maybe a foot or two, but enough to show he was listening. For the next hour, Sarah May read aloud from her father's notes, sharing stories of horses that had been considered hopeless but had eventually found their way back to partnership with humans. She spoke of the patience required, the careful observation of body language, and most importantly, the absolute necessity of allowing the horse to maintain its dignity throughout the process. "The thing is," Sarah May said, closing the journal and looking directly at Devil's Thunder, "I know you're not really a killer. You're just a horse who learned that fighting back was the only way to survive. But you don't have to survive Blackwood anymore. He's dead, and he can't hurt you again." The stallion's reaction to Blackwood's name was immediate and dramatic. His head shot up, his nostrils flared, and for a moment the old rage blazed in his eyes. But then, surprisingly, the fury seemed to drain away, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. "You remember him?" Sarah May said softly. And you know he's gone, don't you? Some part of you knows you don't have to be afraid anymore. What happened next would be talked about around bunkhouse fires for decades to come. Devil's Thunder, the horse that had killed one man and crippled two others, the stallion that hadn't allowed a human within 20 feet of him for 2 years, began to walk slowly toward the fence where Sarah May sat. His movement was cautious, deliberate, but there was no aggression in it, only a careful curiosity that spoke of a mind testing new possibilities. Sarah May didn't move, barely dared to breathe, as the magnificent black stallion approached. When he was close enough that she could see her reflection in his dark eyes, Devil's Thunder stopped and stretched his neck forward, his nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. "Easy, boy," Sarah May whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you. Nobody's ever going to hurt you again if I have anything to say about it." Very slowly, moving with the care of someone diffusing a bomb, Sarah May extended her hand toward the stallion. Devil's Thunder studied it for a long moment, then did something that made Sarah May's heart skip. He lowered his great head and gently touched his muzzle to her palm. The contact lasted only a few seconds before the horse stepped back, but in that brief moment, Sarah May felt something pass between them, an understanding, a tentative trust that was fragile as spun glass, but real as the Montana mountains. Well, I'll be damned. Sarah May spun around to find Jake Morrison standing about 50 feet away, his face white with shock. Behind him, a small crowd of ranch hands had gathered, all staring at the scene before them with expressions of disbelief. "How long have you been watching?" Sarah May asked, her heart still racing from the encounter with Devil's Thunder. "Long enough to see that horse let you touch him," Jake said slowly. "Sarah May, in all my years working with horses, I ain't never seen nothing like that. That stallion was ready to kill anything that moved a week ago." "He's still dangerous," Sarah May warned, glancing back at Devil's Thunder, who had retreated to the far side of the corral but was still watching the proceedings with alert interest. "What we just had was a moment of connection, not a miracle cure. It's going to take time to build real trust." "Time you'll have," said a voice from behind the crowd. Robert Hutchinson pushed through the gathering of ranch hands, his expression thoughtful as he studied both Sarah May and the stallion. "What I just witnessed changes everything. That horse has been nothing but a liability since we captured him, but if you can actually reach him, he could be the finest mount in the territory," Sarah May finished. "Devil's Thunder isn't just any horse, Mr. Hutchinson. Look at his lines, his conformation, the intelligence in his eyes. If his spirit can be healed instead of broken, he could be worth more than every other horse on this ranch combined." Hutchinson nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "Time, patience, and permission to do this my way. No interference from anyone else, no pressure to hurry the process. And," Sarah May's voice grew firm, "absolute assurance that no one will try to help by reverting to traditional breaking methods if they think I'm taking too long." "Done," Hutchinson said immediately. "Jake, pass the word. Devil's Thunder is Sarah May's project, and anyone who interferes will answer to me personally." As the crowd dispersed, buzzing with excited conversation about what they'd witnessed, Sarah May turned back to the corral. Devil's Thunder was still watching her, and when their eyes met, she could swear she saw something in his gaze that hadn't been there before. Hope. "Tomorrow," she told him softly, "we'll take the next step. And the day after that, another one. We'll go as slow as you need to go for as long as it takes. But one day, beautiful boy, you're going to remember what it feels like to run free again, without anger, without fear, just pure joy in being alive." The stallion's ears pricked forward at her words, and for the first time since his capture, Devil's Thunder nickered softly, Not the savage challenge he'd issued to other humans, but the quiet sound a horse makes when acknowledging a friend. The real work was just beginning, but Sarah May knew with absolute certainty that she and the Black Stallion were going to write a new chapter in the legend of the American West, a story of healing, trust, and the unbreakable bond between human and horse, when both are willing to look beyond their fears and find the courage to trust again. Chapter 4. The Legend. 6 weeks later, the impossible had become reality at the Double Bar Ranch. Sarah May Colton, the 19-year-old orphan who'd arrived with nothing but her father's guitar and a gift for understanding horses, had accomplished what seasoned cowboys had declared impossible. She'd not only tamed Devil's Thunder, but she'd done it without breaking his spirit. The transformation had been gradual but remarkable. Each day, Sarah May had spent hours by the corral, sometimes reading, sometimes playing music, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence while the great Black Stallion learned to trust her presence. Slowly, carefully, she'd moved their interactions from the safety of separated by fence rails to sharing the same space within the corral. The breakthrough had come 3 weeks into the process, when Devil's Thunder had voluntarily approached Sarah May and allowed her to place a halter on his magnificent head. The ranch hands who witnessed it swore they'd never seen anything like it. The horse that had killed Bronco Bill Henderson standing quietly, while a slip of a girl fastened leather around his face with gentle hands and soothing words. But it was what happened this morning that would cement Sarah May's legend in Montana Territory folklore forever. The sun was just clearing the eastern mountains when Sarah May approached Devil's Thunder's corral, carrying a blanket and her father's old saddle. The stallion watched her approach with alert but calm attention, nickering softly in greeting, a sound that still amazed everyone who heard it coming from the former killer horse. "Morning, Thunder," Sarah May said, using the shortened name she'd adopted for the stallion. "I think today's the day, don't you?" Over the past 2 weeks, she'd been preparing Thunder for this moment, gradually introducing him to the saddle blanket, letting him smell and investigate the leather and metal that had once been instruments of torture in Jeremiah Blackwood's hands. But Thunder had learned to trust Sarah May's touch, and through her patient guidance, he'd come to understand that not all humans meant pain and domination. A crowd had gathered despite the early hour. Word had spread that today Sarah May was going to attempt the ultimate test of her work with Devil's Thunder. Ranch hands, neighboring ranchers, even the sheriff from the nearest town had come to witness what many still believed would end in tragedy. "She's gonna get herself killed," muttered Tex Williamson, the bronco buster who'd been humbled by his own failures with the stallion. "That horse might seem gentle now, but the minute she tries to climb on his back, all that savage nature will come roaring back." Jake Morrison said nothing, but his hand rested on his holstered pistol. Hutchinson had given strict orders that if Thunder showed any sign of reverting to his killer instincts, the foreman was to shoot the horse immediately rather than let Sarah May be harmed. Inside the corral, Sarah May moved with calm confidence as she approached Thunder with the saddle blanket. The stallion stood perfectly still, though his ears swiveled constantly, monitoring every sound from the crowd gathered outside his enclosure. "Easy, beautiful," Sarah May murmured, her voice carrying the musical quality that had become Thunder's favorite sound. "Just like we practiced. Nothing's different except we have an audience today." She placed the blanket on Thunder's back with the same gentle motions she'd used dozens of times before. The stallion's skin twitched slightly, but he made no move to shy away or strike out. Next came the saddle, settled carefully onto his back while Sarah May kept up a steady stream of quiet conversation. When the cinch was tightened and Thunder showed no signs of objection, the crowd outside the corral fell completely silent. This was the moment of truth, the point where most horses, especially those with traumatic histories, would either submit or explode into violent resistance. Sarah May stood at Thunder's left shoulder, her hand resting on his neck, feeling the controlled power in his muscles and the steady rhythm of his breathing. She could sense his awareness of the watching crowd, could feel the slight tension that spoke of old memories trying to surface, but beneath it all was the solid foundation of trust they'd built together over 6 weeks of patient work. "What do you say, Thunder?" she asked softly, "ready to show them what you're really made of?" The stallion turned his head to look at her, and in his dark eyes Sarah May saw complete trust and something that made her heart soar. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy at the prospect of running again, not in fear or rage, but in partnership with someone who understood him. Sarah May placed her foot in the stirrup and swung up onto Thunder's back in one fluid motion. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Thunder moved, and the crowd gasped in amazement. The stallion didn't buck or rear or attempt to dislodge his rider. Instead, he began to move with a grace and power that spoke of noble bloodlines and generations of proud ancestry. His gait was smooth as silk, his neck arched in conscious pride, his every movement a testament to the magnificence that had been hidden beneath years of rage and pain. Sarah May guided him around the corral with subtle shifts in weight and gentle pressure from her legs, the two of them moving together as if they'd been partners for years rather than minutes. Thunder's ears were pricked forward, his step springy with enthusiasm, and when Sarah May asked him to trot, he responded with the flowing motion of a creature born to run. "My God!" breathed Sheriff Martinez, a man who'd seen every type of horse breaking in 30 years of frontier life. "Look at that animal move. He's not just tamed, he's transformed." But the real moment of legend came when Sarah May guided Thunder toward the center of the corral and brought him to a halt, facing the crowd of spectators. For a moment, horse and rider simply stood there, magnificent in their partnership, and then Sarah May did something that made the watching cowboys question whether they were witnessing reality or some fever dream. She dismounted and stepped away from Thunder, leaving him completely free to do whatever he chose. The stallion could have bolted, could have reverted to his old savage ways, could have done anything. Instead, he did something that would be talked about in bunkhouses and saloons for the rest of the century. Devil's Thunder, the horse that had killed one man and terrorized a dozen others, slowly and deliberately lowered his great head until his muzzle almost touched the ground. It was an unmistakable bow, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement that spoke of intelligence and nobility that transcended the usual relationship between human and horse. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Sarah May only had eyes for Thunder as he raised his head and stepped forward to nuzzle her shoulder with gentle affection. "That's right, beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Show them what you really are. Show them that there's no such thing as a bad horse, only horses that have been treated badly." Robert Hutchinson pushed through the crowd and opened the corral gate, his face bright with amazement and something that looked like pride. "Sarah May," he called out, "I don't know how you did what you just did, but I want to make you an offer. How would you like to be the Double Bar Ranch's first official horse trainer? With your own salary, your own quarters, and complete authority over any horse that needs special handling." Sarah May looked around at the faces surrounding the corral, cowboys who'd laughed at her 6 weeks ago now, looking at her with respect and admiration, neighboring ranchers already calculating how much they'd pay for her services, and Thunder standing beside her like a guardian angel made of midnight and starlight. "I accept," she said with a smile that could have lit up the Montana sky. "But I've got one condition." "Name it," Hutchinson said immediately. "Thunder stays with me. He's not for sale, not for breeding, not for anything. He's my partner now, and partners stick together." "Done," Hutchinson agreed, and the crowd cheered again. As the spectators began to disperse, already crafting the stories they would tell for years to come about the cowgirl who tamed the untamable horse, Sarah May led Thunder from the corral toward the open pasture, where he would run free for the first time since his capture. When she removed his halter and stepped back, Thunder didn't immediately run. Instead, he stood for a moment, looking out at the vast Montana landscape, then turned back to Sarah May with what could only be described as a smile in his dark eyes. Then he was gone, racing across the pasture with the power and grace of a force of nature, his mane streaming like a black banner in the morning wind. But he wasn't running away. He was running for joy, for the pure pleasure of movement and freedom, secure in the knowledge that when he was ready, Sarah May would be waiting for him. And as she watched her magnificent partner celebrate his freedom, Sarah May Colton knew that she'd found her calling in life. She would be the voice for horses like Thunder, the bridge between the wild and the tamed, the proof that understanding was always more powerful than force. The legend of the cowgirl who'd tamed Devil's Thunder would spread throughout the West, inspiring a new generation of horse trainers to seek partnership rather than domination. But for Sarah May, the real victory wasn't in the fame or the job offer or the admiration of the cowboys. The real victory was in Thunder's joy as he ran free across the Montana prairie, finally remembering what it felt like to be magnificent. Epilogue: The Legacy. Years later, when Sarah May Colton had become the most sought-after horse trainer in the American West, and when Thunder had sired a line of remarkable horses known throughout the territory for their intelligence and gentle temperament, old-timers would still gather around campfires to tell the story of the morning when a 19-year-old orphan girl proved that love could triumph over hate, patience over violence, and understanding over force. They would speak of the moment when Devil's Thunder, the killer horse, bowed to the cowgirl who'd seen past his rage to the noble spirit beneath. And in those stories, passed down through generations, the true spirit of the American frontier lived on, not in the conquest of the wild, but in the wisdom to recognize that some things were meant to be partners rather than possessions. Sarah May and Thunder had written a new chapter in the legend of the West, one that proved that the greatest victories weren't won with guns or ropes or spurs, but with the simple recognition that every creature, no matter how damaged, carried within it the spark of something magnificent, just waiting for the right person to help it shine.